Hello, this is Wade Frazier. This is January 30th, 2026, 9:51 a.m. This is a continuation of my oral history. This will cover the time between Dennis Lee's arrest and my testimony at the preliminary hearing, which was the turning point in my life. As I mentioned in the previous post, soon before Dennis was arrested, I was worn out, stress breakdown. I had to leave to try to recover. And my recovery was going up to Washington State and hiking the Cascade Range with my cousin. So we did that. As soon as I got there, the next day we went up into Canada, actually. In fact, we went up to Canada and went over to Hope and snuck into the Pasayten Wilderness from the Canadian side to cut off many miles of trail. So we got to see really awesome parts of the wilderness area without having to do all the work that people normally have to come to do when they come into the United States. That kind of trip is probably impossible today with all the border surveillance. But back then, logging roads went right up to the border, and you could just walk in the United States. Those days are over. And this was another instance, though, where I couldn't sit at a desk for a year and then just do a 40-mile backpack. And so actually, that first trip, and it was like a 40-mile or something, where I hyperextended both knees and took it easy, recovered. So after a month, I was actually feeling pretty good, in pretty good shape. And between trips, I would call my future wife there in Ventura home, and Dennis. And so Dennis was in jail with his astronomical bail, and Allison, his wife, was desperately trying to raise the bail. And so the bail bond companies, usually it was something like this, so $1 million bail. Is it that much? I think the bail bond company would actually charge 100,000, but then you have to put up collateral for the rest. So Allison was trying to get people to put up their property, their homes, and these kinds of things. But my wife offered to put her home up for bail collateral, which was, yeah, noble of her to do that. Anyway, after about a month, they're up in Seattle. And my future wife, said she missed me, wanted me to come back down to Ventura, and so I did. And 2 years earlier, when I chased Dennis across the country to Boston, I had put most of my personal possessions in my grandma's basement in Bellingham. So 2 years later, it was time to retrieve that. So once again, I got a U-Haul trailer, hooked up my Pinto to it, filled it up, and towed it back down to California. And so, Ventura was about you could drive straight through in like 23 hours or something. And anyway, I usually would try to drive straight through or close to it, frequently. Yeah, I've been back and forth through Southern California and Seattle. I don't know, many times, 20. I don't know, quite a number of times. Um, so I tried to go straight through. Couldn't quite make it. Slept in my car near Bakersfield. Only about 100 miles from Ventura. And so anyway, the next morning I was driving into Ventura. And as I drove in, I decided, hey, let me stop by the office on the way home. And so I did. I stopped by the office on the way home. And again, this is back to my otherworldly friends setting me up for these kinds of experiences. And so anyway, so I drove. So I hadn't dropped my trailer off. So here I'm my Pinto towing my trailer. And I actually stopped by the office. And I couldn't go in the parking lot, but I could park in the frontage road to it. So I parked alongside our parking lot. And there was nobody there, pretty much. So usually when we're in business, the parking lot's full of cars with all the people working there, and there was nobody there. Well, not quite nobody there. So there were three guys standing in front of the building as I drove up. And it was Stan, our engineer. I'd been with Dennis for several years by that time. And then Ken Hodgel, and a guy named Stu. And Stu, I haven't really talked about Stu much, but and I'll describe a little bit about Stu here to make this easier to understand. So when that, and I in previous videos I mentioned in Boston, a few months after we got going, I think it was in April of '87, an Amway tycoon came by our office in Boston. Dexter Yeager. Heard he was a billionaire, but I later read it was only worth maybe $400 million or something, some big number. So he was a tycoon, sniffing for opportunities. And the guy who brought him by was a man named Stu, and he was your clean cut Amway looking guy. And Stu, like so many got involved with this, he was from New Hampshire. And when Dennis got going in Ventura, he gave Stu a call, and Stu came out with his wife. So they worked for us. So they worked for us selling the kits. In fact, his wife, I think, did more clerical stuff. So she was doing clerical things. He sold kits. And they were there in Ventura when the raid happened. So they actually, when I was relieved of observing the so-called search, Stu and another guy he brought along actually were also accompanying the deputies on their search. And they told me how, yeah, the sheriff's deputies just were lying sacks. You know, they lied about what they would do, and then they actually said, anyway, they hoodwinked them into leaving the premises for a moment. Said they were eating dinner, and then while they did, they broke into one of the other offices, broke the door down and stuff. And it's just, these guys were, the officials were criminals. So these guys saw that, so they knew the officials were criminals. And so, yeah, from the day one, Stu knew these guys were gangsters. Also, as I mentioned, when I became Dennis's partner, he immediately started treating me like the heir apparent. And when we were in Ventura, and I really, I never had Dennis tell me Wade's the heir apparent, but I later hear about this. And, oh yeah, Wade's the heir apparent. And so when my health started going downhill after the raid, the stress problems, etc., I asked for Dennis for the summer off. Stu stepped up and he said, Dennis, I should be your heir apparent now. And this is another situation that I didn't know about until I read it in one of Dennis's books. But Dennis told Stu, he said, Stu, Wade's a Boy Scout, you're not. So you don't have it, Stu. You don't have it to be, you don't have what it takes to do this. So I'm not sure how well. Here's the evidence of how Stu took that. So Ken Hodgel, again, so Stan and Ken and Stu, and talking in front of the building. Ken Hodgel, I mentioned before. Ken Hodgel was this Mormon, used to be the world's biggest potato grower. He looked just like, he looked and acted just like Mr. Rogers. And Stu was this clean-cut Amway-looking guy. And Stan was this engineer who built the 747 facility at Boeing. You know, he led the engineering teams to build the world's first airliner, the Boeing 707. Stan had quite a life. But Stan, when Dennis met Stan had actually been on the scrap. He was there in Eastern Washington. And again, Stan got bladder cancer. He got eased out of Boeing in his early 60s. And Dennis kind of picked him off the scrap heap. Yeah, Stan was kind of unemployable. At that time, actually, he was my age. He was my age that I am today, 67, when this was happening. So he was kind of unemployable. And he was always kind of in it for the money. So he was all, and I love Stan. He was a good guy, but I knew that he was there with Dennis. You know, a lot of it was to make a living. So Stan was always in it for the money. And Stu, so about a month, maybe two after the raid, and then again, Dennis was doing all the scrambling, trying to avoid the death blows, and he actually called a meeting of our national dealers he was in Salt Lake City, as I recall. And so anyway, Salt Lake City, and he flew me and Mr. Researcher out. Mr. Researcher, I'd known him a long time. I brought him into the operation. So he brought us out to Utah at this conference. And there was, I don't know, there's 100 people, maybe more, maybe a couple hundred, something like that. And Dennis actually had me get up and talk to the crowd, which I hadn't done before. That's the only one I think I ever did that, address the crowd. And I was sort of telling people how they could try to avoid the death blows that the officials would might aim at them. And when I got done, I got a round of applause, and actually Stu stood up and he led a standing ovation for me. And the day I met Dennis, that's when he did his Project Whoopee, which was competing with the electric companies at the Seattle Center in their opera house in front of maybe 1,000 people, some number like that. And during his, when he made his speech, when he finished it, he got a standing ovation. And less than 3 months later, he gets his company stolen. And many of those people who gave him the standing ovation also cheered when his company was stolen 3 months later. So I saw what standing ovations were worth, which is nothing. In fact, they're probably worth less than nothing because they can be a form of manipulation. So when Stu led the standing ovation of me, it's sort of like, isn't that interesting? So that morning, Stan and Stu and Ken all come up to my car. I pull up and I have no idea what's going on. Again, the company, the offices are closed. There's nobody there except these three guys. And they walked up to me, and Stan and Stu and Ken, they all shake my hand, like really enthusiastically, although Ken looked maybe a little sheepish when he shook my hand. But at that moment, I had no idea what was going on. And then Stan said to me that he and Mr. Research were going to work for these guys. And in 1 nanosecond, maybe a millisecond, but I'll say 1 nanosecond, I knew that Ken and Stu were going to steal the company. That's what they were there for, was to steal the company. I was right, but I'd seen I'd seen the show too many times. So immediately I was like, I knew they were trying to steal the company. And Stan had seen that show too, but I'm sure they said, Stan will pay you. And so Stan was like, he could be had for just offering to pay him. So what I did not believe, I refused to believe that Mr. Researcher also would go work for these guys. And he was old enough to be my dad. And I was just thinking, but how to say it? Unless you've been in this milieu and seen people stealing companies and stuff, you don't know what's going on. It's naive. Like I was naive on the day of the raid that it was a death blow that was being aimed at us. So yeah, until you actually have those experiences, naivete is our starting point. We're inexperienced, so we haven't seen these things. And so, but I actually did not believe that Mr. Researcher would actually go to work for these guys. I said I immediately understood these guys, what they were up to. So I drove home, unloaded the trailer, returned the trailer, and then the first thing I did was I went to see Wayne, who lived, 10 minutes from where I live, something like that. And went to see Wayne. And it was a shaken up Wayne. And when I came into his living room and sat there with him, the first, it was one of the most heartbreaking questions I've ever been asked. And Wayne said, gee, Wade, do you really think Dennis is a good guy? Is he a good man? And it was just heartbreaking to hear that. And so for the next hour, I told Wayne what I thought was happening. And I was 100% correct. And so again, I'd seen the show. I'd seen the show before. I was like, okay, this is what's going on. And after an hour of me telling Wayne all the things that were really happening, then Wayne said, Wade, I just wanted to hear what you had to say because I need to hear it. But I've decided that I'm going to support Dennis. So anyway, that was where it was. And Wayne decided he was going to support Dennis, and Wayne was the same. And he was really the hero of what happened in Ventura. So he said he was going to support Dennis still, even though Ken, in his maneuvering, he had threatened Wayne. Okay, yeah, basically it's carrots and sticks. So they threaten you, they dangle a carrot, or they use their stick on you. This is again carrot and stick stuff. So Ken was doing that, doing carrot and stick stuff. In fact, when Dennis was in jail, right after that, Ken and Stu and Wayne and some other people gathered at Wayne's home, and they had a call with Dennis from the jail. In fact, Dennis told me this later, and they're putting various people on the phone. And again, and Ken was leading the mutiny. He was leading the attempt to steal it all. And Dennis, during all this, then they put Ken on the phone with Dennis, and Dennis said, "Ken, what do you want?" And Ken play acted for the other people in the room. And he basically said, "Dennis, you won't listen. You blah, blah." He acted like Dennis was being unreasonable or something. And Dennis said, "What do you want, Ken?" And so at that moment, Dennis knew what Ken was up to. So he was play acting for the rest of them. And so, anyway, yeah, he looked like Mr. Rogers until he was Mr. Rogers with a chainsaw, and so this was, and again, these guys are good. So I said, I believe that Ken was working for the global elite when he did all this, which we'll come to. So that was quite a meeting at Wayne's home, and I left there. And then the next thing I did was I went to go see Allison. And again, so she wasn't at the office, and so I can't remember if I went to her house. Probably I went to her house. And I showed up, and Allison was desperately trying to keep everything afloat. And but she was running. I mean, it was super desperate times for her. And so she had to go do some stuff. And her daughters, it's summertime, so her daughters are there at home. So she asked me to babysit them, Uncle Wade. So it wasn't the first time I had babysat them. So anyway, so yeah, sure, I'll babysit the kids. And so in fact, was it then? No, I think, again, I'm trying to remember all the events of this day. I mean, so much happened on that day and the subsequent days. It's hard to, the sequence of events is now, it's 40 years later. I'm kind of going, which one happened first? And it's possible at that moment, I watched her kids for an hour or so, an hour or two. And during that, again, I used to live there, right? I used to live in that house. And during when I was there, the phone rang. And this is before answering machines, et cetera. So I pick up the phone. I go, "Hey," I answer the phone. And some guy's on the phone. And it's somebody that I didn't know. But apparently he knew Dennis, I guess fairly well. And so he asked me what was happening. And I talked about old Dennis is in jail, the $1 million bail, and the company now is kind of out of business. And a few things happened. One of those, he said, Ventura County is the most corrupt county in the United States. Now, by that time, it wasn't a surprise, but I had actually not heard somebody say that before. He said that, yeah, Ventura County is the most corrupt county in the United States. And he said that, if he called Dennis, and he said hellraisers. Dennis was what he would call a hellraiser. So guys who are really trying to stir stuff up. He said the safest place to do that is in downtown Manhattan and across the street from the White House. You need to be in the broad daylight, right, with the spotlight on you. That's the safest place you can be. Out in the hinterland, yeah, they can just slit your throat. Out in the hinterland, nobody knows. And so, anyway, this guy seemed to know his stuff. So I was listening to the guy. Well, anyway, so we had this conversation. I don't know, toss it 10 minutes or something. And when he hung the phone up, I turned around. I was in the kitchen on the phone. I turned around, and Dennis's daughters walked into the room with their eyes this big around, going, "Dad's in jail?" Yeah, so Allison hadn't told her daughters yet that Dennis was in jail. She told them he was on a business trip. So I felt about 1 inch tall. I'd forgotten they were there. I forgot that this charade of dad on the business trip, and so I feel I feel pretty small. These little girls are eyes just big around, and interestingly, many years later, I actually asked the oldest daughter, who was like 8 at the time, and this is like, I think I asked her in 2013, maybe. But I asked her, I said, "Do you remember when I talked to this guy and I said Dennis was in jail and that's how you found out?" And she didn't remember, blessedly, and she didn't recall that. So, but anyway, so Allison gets home and I confessed that what I said on the phone, and she said, "Oh, it's been a month. I can't keep this up any longer." So it was time they knew. The time they learned that your dad was in jail. Um, so and then I went over to Mr. Researcher's home. Again, I really didn't I did not believe I did not yet believe that he would really go work for these guys, these cutthroats. And again, Stan was in it for the money. I wasn't terribly surprised that Stan would do that. I mean, it was really disappointing. I'm sure. I mean, if he just had 2-second conversation with Allison, he would have known what they were up to. But they dangled, "We'll pay you, Stan." So I went to Mr. Researcher's home. I talked to him. I said, "I heard that you're going to work for Stu and Ken." And he goes, "Yeah, yeah. Me and Stan are going to work for Stu and Ken." And I just said, these guys are slime, man. These guys are criminals, and they're stealing the company, and you're going to get hurt. If you go work for them, you're really going to get hurt. Way more than you've been so far by what happened to your office at the raid. And he scoffed at me. Like, "Oh, what it was, one young guy like me know." Oh man. So he and Stan, they were like 5-year-old boys who jump into a stranger's car for the promise of candy. Yeah, so I left the house really shocked and fearful for his safety. And he had no idea what he was getting involved in. So yeah, it's like going to work for mobsters or something. It was just like, oh my God. So I ended up back with Allison. So Allison wanted, again, she was desperately trying to hold the place together. So she had me um come with her. And now that I think about it, maybe I went to see my Mr. Professor before I saw Allison. Maybe. I mean, Mr. Research before I saw Allison. Maybe that's the sequence of it. But anyway, so I saw Allison, and she actually she took me to the office and she said, "There's a lot of stuff you need to do," because she and Dennis's head sales guy, this guy he was actually a minister. He was a Christian minister and had a degree in physics, and so he was one of the guys who were one of the guys who've been selling kits there. And she was going to fly to Colorado with him, and they were going to try to give the company to a billionaire. So there's a billionaire in Colorado, and they were going to go there to try to give it to them. And Ken knew everything that was going. I mean, nothing that Allison could do, Ken wasn't aware of with all of his intelligence methods or whatever. And so he just dogged her steps. And I'm sure he called the billionaire. He tried to queer the deal, etc. And his job was to try to make sure that he sold the company. Dennis stayed in jail. And again, I think this was his job. And in fact, I believe that Dennis, after Seattle, Dennis survived, lived to try again. In Boston, we left before they could strike, and then in Ventura, I think Ken's job was to make sure that nothing arose from the ashes of Ventura. I think that's what he was trying to do, because everybody who signed on with Ken he stuck a dagger in their chest eventually. Yeah, he screwed over everybody who got involved with him. I think that was his job. Similar to Bill Delt, the hitman in Seattle. So, yeah, this is what these guys do. They're good, very good at what they do. And the reason, so I learned from Allison that the reason why Ken, Stu, and Stan were in the parking lot of our company was that literally a few minutes. So I arrived like 10 minutes after this had happened, where Ken came into the office, walked through the office, and said that he had just had a meeting with Mr. Deputy, and that everybody who kept working for the company would be considered an accomplice. Yeah, so everybody who kept work there would be criminally prosecuted. And so the employees just ran out the door, and they stampeded out the door. And again, when I showed up, literally a few minutes later, there was just those three guys standing there. And so, yeah, and Allison locked up the building and left. And so anyway, so here's later on the same day, Allison takes me back to the building, and she is, taking me in a dentist's office, showing me stuff. And there was stuff to do with the customer list and stuff. It was a bunch of, clerical kinds of work. And we, by that time, after the raid, we ended up buying a bunch of Apple Macintoshes. So we had several, I don't know, 3, 4 or something, 5 Apple Macintosh computers. We had also a fledgling computer network. And anyway, so she was showing me what to do. And so the next day was when she would be gone. And so I was going to do this work the next day. And so she was showing me what to do. Yeah, I still hadn't seen my girlfriend yet, right? I barely touched home, and I was sucked up into this big tornado. And so she showed me all the stuff to do. And then she left. She actually left for a minute, 2 minutes, and then had me just sit there. She came back, and she was so harried that she had this van, and she drives into the parking lot and parks right in front of our front door. And I could see the windows. Dennis's office had windows, so I could see her park in front of our front door and run in. And she left her car keys in the ignition. And I saw some other car pull up behind her, and the guy jumps out, and he goes in and he steals her keys. And it turned out this guy was one of her employees. He was being trained to be an installer. And so he was owed 1 week of wages. 1 week of wages, like $500, is what he had not been yet paid for when the company closed its doors. And so he was stealing the keys to hold him ransom for his $500 of wages. Yeah, so Allison had to pay this guy $500 that day, I believe, to get her keys back. And this was the beginning. This is just the beginning of this kind of behavior. So oh my. I'm just remembering this. There was so much going on. So I went home, after Allison showed me this stuff, and she went back to ransom her keys back, etc. I went home, and the next morning, so Allison that evening or the next morning, she got on an airplane to Colorado with her sales guy, the billionaire. And so I went in to do the work. So I don't know, 10 a.m. or something. I finally went in, like, okay. And then again, the place is empty. And I go into the office, and again, we had 9,000 square feet, lots of offices. And anyway, what she showed me the day before, I was like going to go use those computers, and the computer I thought was at this desk, it wasn't there. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so I remember being kind of confused, kind of bewildered. It's like, you're kind of questioning your own sanity. Wasn't I just sitting there yesterday? When she showed me the stuff on this computer to do, and the computer's not there right now. Wasn't this the right office? And then I started walking through the building, and I was like, I don't see any computers. So anyway, I went home just going, oh, I couldn't do the work without the computers. So I was bewildered. I didn't know what happened. So Allison gets back the next day, and I find out what happened. So, and again, I mentioned that, back in, September of '87, when the company started rocketing off like that, and we went to 2 volunteers to 40 employees in a couple of months. And I remember we hired a woman, and I think she might have done reception a little bit, but then she did some clerical stuff for us. Can't remember what it was. And she seemed nice enough, a nice enough lady. And after only a couple of months, though, she moved. She left, moved to, I think, Montana. something like that, Montana, Wyoming, somewhere up there. And we wished her well, and she left. And then, well, anyway, she returns a couple of months later with a new boyfriend. And so, well, we welcome her back, and we actually hire a boyfriend. And so in fact, we made him manager of customer service. So he was our customer service manager. And what happened was, again, when Ken did his little performance there, that frightened all the employees, and they all ran out of the building and never returned. Yeah, the doors never opened again of our operation there. That was and she and her boyfriend, they were part of all this. Well, Allison then asked for the key. So she actually gave this guy the key. So he was operating in the other building. She sort of made him responsible for, she gave him the keys to the building, as he would open it up and lock it up. And she asked him for the keys back, and now it's all over. And he refused. He refused to give her the keys back. Well, anyway, so what happened was that evening, he and his girlfriend used their keys to get in our offices, and they stole all of our computers. They even stole office equipment we had rented. We didn't even own it. So they stole stuff we didn't even own. And to cap it off, they also stole all the customer service files that we had, which amounted to probably thousands of pages of documents. So all the customer service files, they took it to the sheriff's department and delivered it to them as evidence. This is what they did. Obviously all criminal, but yeah, so this was, in fact, the cameraman that we had, the one who, the scoop of his career, was filming the raid because he was there looking for work. And when Dennis was arrested, he had nothing more to do. So Allison actually asked him to leave the company, and he wouldn't. He refused to leave. Yeah, Allison didn't have much authority as she would have liked. And to his credit, I guess, he tried to get media interested in what was happening. And in fact, he had CBS News interested for a day or two. Nothing came of that. But when the company got shut down, he stole several $1,000s worth of camera equipment, etc., for his wages, 1 week's of wages or whatever. Yeah. So you're owed. I mean, it's just, this is typical. In fact, a machinist. So the machinist who we built the machine shop for, Allison asked him to sell off the machine shop, sell off the equipment, and then get the money, and then she would work with that. Well, anyway, this guy sold the machine shop for $5,000 and then pocketed it and skipped town. Yeah, so everybody was just stealing. So everybody was just stealing whatever they could from the carcass of our company. And it actually was worse than what I saw in Seattle. So, yeah, it was actually worse than what I saw in Seattle. Yeah, quite a bit worse, really. And so, yeah. And what I haven't mentioned yet is that while Allison is doing everything to keep the doors open for the month. So for a month, she actually tried to keep the doors open. Again, Ken was leading the mutiny, all this kind of stuff. When I became Dennis's partner, he actually asked me if they could use my American Express card to charge things on, and we paid it off every month. Well, by the time I had left in June, this is now before Dennis got arrested. And again, the operation was already kind of not doing well. And so Allison wasn't paying off my credit card. And I asked her, I said, Allison, this wasn't the deal, you need to pay off my credit card. And she was, anyway, I got it. So she was so desperate, she wouldn't pay off my American Express card. And then, then people just kept charging. Eventually, $27,000 was charged to my American Express card, which at that time was more than I ever earned in a year. And so when the doors closed, I was stuck with $27,000 in my credit card. So in order to pay these loyal employees to keep the doors open, so instead of paying off my card, she paid the employees their wages. I got it, but it bankrupted me. So that was every one of Dennis's financiers had their lives ruined or were bankrupted. This came with the territory. happened to John Spickard, happened to me, and it was going to happen to Wayne. Um, what was the next one? The cameraman. Oh, and so I was there maybe 2 weeks back in Ventura, and again with all of this chaos and mayhem, which again after I mean it was only a week of that or something where it was all over. It was all over. And actually, there was another dealer in Kentucky or something that was gonna, Allison was gonna move the operation, what was left of the operation, this guy in Kentucky, who seemed like a good guy. I mean, Dennis being this literalist Christian and stuff, this guy talked about karma, et cetera. And so he was like, wait, this guy kind of thinks like you do, but it's like, I don't care what their beliefs are, it's their integrity that counts, And so this guy, I heard this guy pulled something, but actually, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit ahead, where around Labor Day, we loaded all of the assets we had left into a trailer, and Wayne was going to drive Allison and her children out to Kentucky in this van, in around Labor Day, and I helped them load it, etc. Well, it turned out to be one of these heat waves. And so it was 110 degrees out there. Anyway, his car overheated, his van overheated, so he couldn't make the drive. So they came back to Wayne's house, and soon after, so literally a week or two after the company closed, Allison was going to be homeless. So anyway, so she and her children were dealing with Wayne, and they lived with Wayne for more than a year. Yeah, almost 2 years, I think. So, Wayne took him in. Wayne and his wife took him in. Yeah, Wayne the Saint. So anyway, so they ended up going back to Ventura because, again, his car couldn't make it. And then it turned out that this guy in Kentucky showed his true colors. So it was a good thing. It was a good thing that they stayed because, if they hadn't have stayed, Dennis may not have never left. He spent the rest of his life behind bars if they had left, and so it was a good thing that they stayed. But it cost all of us very dearly. So after just after like a week or two, that was kind of a wait for trial. And again, so I left. So I went back up to Seattle, hiked for another month. And my future wife came and stayed with me for like a week. We had some fun. So I had some fun little interludes there. And in fact, just before I did like a 5-day backpack by myself when I was fasting there in late August. And to this day, it was probably my best backpack of my life. I was in God's country, an incredible country by myself. I didn't see anybody for days, kind of thing. And so that was great. I remember as literally as I was there next to my tent in the meadow next to the lake, I was thanking the powers that be for a little break in this chaos. So then I was wait for trial, and so I came back to face the music. So I had this is all the break I was going to get, and so I had to look for work. In fact, American Express kept calling, and I'm like, well, I don't even pay with it yet. And they started threatening me. They started saying, we'll force you into bankruptcy. And I had nothing. So again, anyway, so they convinced me. They kept saying, we'll force you into bankruptcy. And I'm like going, well, is that okay? That sounds like a good option. Maybe I will go bankrupt. So I did. And so I told them, okay, I am going to go bankrupt. So, and again, I couldn't afford an attorney or anything. So I did it myself. There's a do-it-yourself bankruptcy kit. So I bought a, do-it-yourself bankruptcy kit and made my petition in my spare time, and eventually in December, I filed for bankruptcy. And I had to go to work. So yeah, I was flat broke, right? So better off than Dennis, but I had to work. So originally I started to see if I could find a job in Ventura, and I went into some employment agency. And as soon as I walked in the door, and anyway, there was actually one of our former employees was there, and I knew that, how to say it, I knew my name. I was radioactive in Ventura because what was going on. And so, and then actually, as I had an interview with this young woman about my credentials, etc., she had never heard of the big accounting firms. I mean, I had been in the big time, you know, the skyscrapers, the big time and stuff, and she didn't know what it was. And so I realized that I was not going to, I mean, how to say it? I was a big fish in a little pond, and I wasn't going to be able to work in Ventura, or I wouldn't even want to work in Ventura. Then I decided I need to go and do LA. So I started contacting recruiters in Los Angeles, and soon I was working as a temp in LA. And for me, driving in Los Angeles, I mean, it was the irony of it. Again, my friends at work. So I had left Southern California twice before, vowing never to return. And there I was driving to Los Angeles to return. I'm like, it was like, what do you guys, what's up? You know, what the hell's going on here? Why do I keep ending up here? And so I was not happy about that. There I was, you know, driving, but I met my wife for this trip and stuff. So it was, again, it was part of the journey. Back when I saw Dennis in September, I was, you know, you said the whole Ventura thing, I wish it hadn't happened. In fact, if I had been asked about it, we wouldn't have moved to Ventura. But Dennis said, you know, it was meant to be. Now, Dennis had a lot of faith in God. So I guess I should too. So, anyway, there I was driving to Los Angeles, working as a temp, looking for permanent work though. But at that point, I was working as a temp for a while. And on the way home, driving from LA, I drove right by the jail every day. So in the morning and evening, I'm driving right by this jail where Dennis is. And so, yeah, I remember the thoughts going through my head as I'm driving past the jail where Dennis was sitting. Yeah, it was, in fact, Wayne eventually had an office across the street from the jail. And I mentioned that driving past the jail every day. And Dennis said, and then Wayne said, well, I can see it out my window in my office. So yeah, we're all thinking about Alec Dennis sitting there in jail. And all the documents that were stolen from us and given to the deputies, well, they should have returned them. They were stolen documents. So in fact, in Seattle, when Betsy, the hatchet lady for the attorney general, when she realized she was in receipt of stolen documents, she immediately returned them with a big apology, etc., hoping she wouldn't get prosecuted. Well, in Ventura County, it's just like stolen documents are fine. We'll put it into evidence and stuff. So yeah, they were idiots. Okay, they were really they were not only dishonest and criminal, but they were incompetent. And these guys were stupid. They didn't understand. They didn't understand the law that they were supposedly trying to enforce. So yeah, you don't. And in fact, there was another instance that when eventually my money got the leading constitutional attorney in the United States that took the case eventually, which will be coming later. One of the documents they saw in discovery was one of the. In fact, when I was there, she had just started. Some Latino woman, who worked there, and when the company got shut down, all these employees were streaming into Mr. Deputy's office, and again, when the company got closed, again, most of our employees actually went into Mr. Deputy's office to literally fall on their knees and beg for his mercy. And she actually, he was so busy holding court that she actually ended up talking to his sidekick. And his sidekick, anyway, she said, you know, Allison has this list of all the estate dealers and stuff on her desk, and I know where it is, and I could steal it for you. You know, so she offered to steal documents for the sheriff's department. And the guy, what he should have said was, that's a crime. You don't steal stuff, right? And so what he said was, well, you know, we can't order you to steal anything because then you'd be acting on our behalf. We need a search warrant for that. He didn't tell her she shouldn't have. So what happened was, a couple days later, she calls back and says, hey, I stole it. So you want it? I go, sure, come down. And so she ends up bringing her stolen document down to the sheriff's office and delivering it, and it became part of the discovery evidence. And here's the memo they're describing this. Well, when Dennis's big time attorney saw this, he kind of laughed, because that was the exact crime that the Internal Revenue Service committed against his clients, and he actually sent Internal Revenue Service people to prison for what they had done. And so, and again, he took the case more to sue these guys for their civil rights violations than anything else. Yeah, he knew they didn't have a case, but he was interested in, that's when he made millions off of suing governments for violating the rights of people. That was his gig, which I'll get to later. And what I also didn't talk about, yeah, I'll get to it here. Let me see here. So to give again, there's so much to talk about, and so many events that are hard to believe. In fact, while I was making this series, I saw an article, which in my Substack post on this, I linked to this article on the corruption of Ventura County's probation department. Now, this is national media an article on Ventura County's corruption. What a surprise. Yeah, the probation department, which, yeah, very correct. It turned out, I eventually realized that corruption is everywhere. So it's not just the sheriff's department, it's not just the district attorney, it's not just the probation department, it's everything. It's all corrupt. So, yeah, that's why it earned the most corrupt county in the United States. Interestingly, in the years since I heard that guy say that, repeatedly now, several times, I have seen, or people have told me, that they've seen, again, there have been national TV shows on this, et cetera, of the most corrupt police departments, all this kind of stuff. And Ventura County consistently ranked near the top. Literally, it was like Oakland, New Orleans, and Ventura County. These are like the three most corrupt jurisdictions in the United States. And they didn't tell me that growing up. So a couple weeks after Dennis got arrested, so this is early July now. So this is like, I guess, the mid-year promotions or something. So it was in the paper. I was gone, so I was in Seattle, in the mountains when this happened. But 2 weeks after or like a week after Dennis was arrested, promotions were announced, and Mr. Deputy was promoted to be lieutenant. In fact, he was one of the youngest, if not the youngest, people ever promoted to lieutenant in Ventura County. And not only that, but he was given an award, a special award, for performing the most difficult investigation in department history on us. Not only that, but he was also put to be in charge of the jail, so he could look after his career-making catch, so he could see to Dennis's comfort. And then his sidekick, this idiot who doesn't understand what stolen documents means, he was promoted to sergeant. So he was promoted to sergeant. Mr. Deputy was promoted to lieutenant. Yeah, the promotions all around, smoke cigars. This is how it works in the most corrupt county in the United States. And so that's also why people were on their knees in his office, because now he was King Rat. So he played like Emperor of Ventura County at that time. And wouldn't want his afterlife. And as dismaying as all of that was, and again, stuff that, again, the old saying, I used to be disgusted, now I'm amused. It was kind of like that to a degree, but the stuff that you couldn't believe became normal. Yeah, stuff like, does that ever happen? Does that ever happen? And you're going, oh yeah, it's another day. Every day was some new outrage. But as dismaying as all that was, the most unbelievable part for me was Mr. Researcher's behavior. So his office was the one that they ransacked in the raid. They stole everything out of his office, photographed the blueprints, etc. It was an espionage and criminal exercise. He saw that. I said he never recovered from that. He was never the same after that. And so he knew these people. In fact, later on, he told me how much he hated those people. Well, he hated them, but not enough not to get on his knees and beg for his mercy. So he went to see Mr. Deputy for an interrogation to basically beg for his mercy. Yeah. fact, he said every bad thing. If I eventually heard the tape, heard part of the tape, or I heard the tape of part of this interrogation, where he was saying every bad thing about Dennis he could, which none of it was like criminal stuff. It was just like, oh, he has bad breath too, and this kind of thing. And yeah, so he in fact, what happened was that he was trying to distance himself from Dennis as much as possible, and but he also knew that we had legitimate technology. He also knew that we had the world's best heating system. He also believed that the free energy path with these hydraulic heat engines, it was actually could work. And so he wasn't defending Dennis, but he was defending the technology. Well, that was not the program. So, and again, eventually when we heard he had done this, we asked for the tape because we were entitled to it. So we asked to tape the interrogation, and they somehow lost most of the tape. This is normal. This is normal. So the first 45 minutes, maybe it was an hour and a half, but it was first 40 minutes or something, maybe an hour, something like this, when I'm hearing this, listening to this shameful episode. I mean, I was really ashamed for Mr. Researcher when I was hearing all this. Mr. Deputy was also, he was friendly and polite, etc. And in fact, during that, again, the scoffing. So actually, Mr. Researcher, he told Mr. Deputy that I had said that Stu and Ken were slime, quote, slime. And in this really like scoffing, ridiculous manner, like, can you believe the stupid things that young man would say? And then Mr. Deputy remarked that, well, gee, Wade hadn't even made a set of books for the company. And well, yeah, 2 months into the rocket ship, I certainly had. And then he also stole all of my records, so I wouldn't be able to do it anyway. So for him to make that kind of remark reminds me of the John Milton quote: "Those who poke out other people's eyes, reproach them of their blindness." So anyway, so after about an hour or so of all this distancing himself as far from Dennis and me and everybody else as possible, so he wouldn't face the retribution of the same gangsters who raped him. He defended the technology, and then Mr. Deputy started yelling at him. So again, then Mr. Nice Guy was over. He started yelling at him and stuff, and basically he said, if he testified at all for the defense, then he would be prosecuted himself. Yeah, so he'd be sharing the same jail cell next to Dennis. That was the threat they delivered to him. Yeah, in fact, Mr. Researcher later told me that the interrogation lasted like 4 or 5 hours. It wasn't an hour. So anyway, he left thoroughly frightened, as he should have been. And then literally the day after he got back from this interrogation, he told me that I should go and get on my knees in front of Mr. Deputy and beg for his forgiveness. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that was his stance. Yeah, it was so cowardly. And I was like, oh, man. And that was the most dismaying part for me was seeing that. Yeah, I got to see. Oh, it was so ugly. Again, in the sea of darkness, there was Wayne and a handful of others. So within a week or so, everybody except a handful of people, everybody had either they ran and hid, okay, or they got on their knees in Mr. Deputy's office and begged for mercy, or they offered to help take us out further. This was what everybody did, and there was only a handful of us. Back in Ventura, there was like maybe a handful, like 4 of us or something, who actually stood up to these people. Everybody else ran and hid, helped him out, all this kind of stuff. Pled for mercy, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them were just employees, so I get it. They were just in it for a paycheck. So they didn't want to be a part of that. Part of me was sympathetic to that. Yeah. And the interesting thing was that there was a mountain of documentation related to the heat pump, this rules-based heating system. I mean, there was no argument about that. And there's a stack of data, and the only way they can make the fraud charges stick, the only way they did the $1 million bail and all this stuff was the fraud charges that supposedly, Dennis was defrauding people, and the only way they could do that was to make the case that his heat pump didn't even work. And there was this mountain of scientific data, customers, scientific labs and stuff. And I remember going, how are they going to be able to somehow make that disappear? Well, they did. And this was, and I'll talk about this in a later a video, but this is how Kangaroo Court operates. Yeah, so they actually were able to successfully get any evidence that heat pump worked out of court. Well, they tried. They almost all of it. And then they paraded witnesses who never, experts who had never seen the heat pump work before and declared it wouldn't work. It's this kind of stuff. Or a guy who tested a broken system, this kind of thing. Yeah, it was just, yeah. I was getting an education on how Kangaroo Court operated, which was a turning point in my life. So I'm gonna put this on pause for just a second. Okay, next. So anyway, so Stan really did go to work for Ken, and Ken's operation was in Texas. So Stan drove out to so Stan was from Ellensburg, Washington. So he drives from Ventura. He drives out to Texas to go work for Ken. And in fact, Dennis later told me that Stan used his industry connections to actually put in a panel order. And a panel order is $100,000 for an order. So somebody has some money to do that. My guess is that Ken got it from the customers that he stole. Again, he had successfully stolen the company. So Ventura was closed down, but he had this operation going in Texas with Stu there and other sidekicks and these, a bunch of the dealers. And so, in fact, so Stan got there, and Stan. So when Stan built the factory there in Seattle back in 85. Again, it was consumer equipment, right? This heat pump, et cetera. And so you had to have it, the electronics and stuff approved. And so people probably heard of Underwriter Laboratories. That you ever have a piece of electronic gear or whatever, you just have a UL sticker on it, and that's basically announcing that it's safe, it was made in safe conditions, et cetera, particularly electrical equipment. Anyway, then there's called National. There's a bunch of companies that do this that will certify equipment, but also they certify the facilities. And so the UL sticker will actually, it's not just for the equipment, it's actually also for the facility that made it. And so they use, because it's cheaper, so they use a company called ARL. I think it was American Research Laboratories, and they use this. ARL was this competitor to UL, and they used ARL to certify the equipment in the facility in Seattle. And so anyway, so Stan there was a bunch of leftovers. There was a bunch of stickers that had been left over, ARL stickers from the factory. And Stan carried those around like a talisman, like it was a holy grail or something. Yeah, it was always, and in fact, he and Dennis treated those ARL stickers like they were some like holy grail kind of thing, but they really were worthless because it was only specific to the facility that built them. But other people didn't know that. So anyway, so Stan was sort of like, I have these ARL stickers. And when he drove out there to Texas, and I think he'd already made the panel order. And so again, Stu was, again, Ken and Stu were good at what they did. And so Stu was like Mr. Friendly and all this kind of stuff. And again, he worked on our operation for months, et cetera. And so when Stan got there, and I don't know if it's the first day or the second day, but soon after Stan got there, Ken used Stu's relationship with Stan to winkle those ARL stickers out of Stan's hands, because it's a new boss now. So they said, Stan, we need to give us those ARL stickers. And so Stan did. So he gave him the ARL stickers. And less than an hour later, Stan was fired. So they fired him on the spot. And Stan then was left to somehow get home from Texas to Ellensburg, Washington, destitute, penniless, right? So, and that's when, and about that time, the light bulb went off Mr. Researcher. Hey, these really aren't good guys after all. Yeah, so it took that. And Stan, to his credit, so soon as Stan died in 1990, pneumonia from complications of his bladder cancer. Yeah, he was a World War II vet. He actually died in a VA hospital. Um, and Stan, um, literally about a month before he died, he and Mr. Research were tight. They were really close and stuff. And so Stan actually maybe 2 months before he died, but anyway, Stan stayed with him for a little while. When he came down and testified at Dennis's prosecutorial misconduct hearing, which will be coming. And to Stan's credit, I later heard this. Stan told Mr. Researcher that he and Stan were a couple of dupes, saps. He said, we're saps. We're the world's saps to be duped like we were. It was just like, yeah, Stan basically said we're idiots, to actually trust people like Stu and Ken. And so I got to give Stan credit for that, to actually admitting how foolish they were, it could have turned out much worse for them. So I'm glad that it was just Stan getting fired after a day or so. And Mr. Researcher really actually never got involved with them, because actually my warnings, he starts seeing stuff. He's going, uh-oh, these aren't the good guys, are they? So he eventually got it. And he didn't get too hurt, with them, thank God. But Stan just getting fired, having to make his way across the continent, destitute. But Stan, he was just, everybody who worked with Ken was screwed over in the end. And I think that was his job. And Spill Delp in Seattle was similar. So anybody who, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think Ken's job was to make sure that nothing arose from the ashes of Ventura. Yeah, the global elite did not want to see Dennis live to try again or anything. We were a nuisance, a big nuisance. And so they wanted to make us go away forever. And making sure that Dennis never saw the side of the bars again was the central part of that plan. And we thwarted their plan eventually at awesome cost to ourselves. But that'll come later. Victor Fisher, to his credit, so when Ken made his play, so Victor Fisher, when again his hydraulic heat engine, it actually was developed in Australia. He had a company in Australia, and again this is normal. So he was again, it's more a capitalist play. So actually, somebody raised like $10 million around developing his engine, but only like $2 million of it went to actually developing it. The rest was for the overhead, all the capitalist killing people were making from the seed money. Yeah, this is all too common in the world of capitalism. So anyway, so Victor had already seen this kind of skullduggery before. And so he knew that Dennis was it. I mean, he knew that Dennis was the talent. And as soon as Ken made his play, like me, Victor Fisher smelled it a mile away. He goes, I ain't signed up with those guys. And so so he did not play ball. He was smart enough and experienced enough not to play ball with Ken and company. But he didn't help either. So Victor just disappeared. So as soon when Dennis couldn't pay anymore, Victor departed for parts unknown. He just disappeared, and he could have helped, but he didn't. He could have helped with the trial, etc., but he just decided to disappear instead. So I give him points for not being stupid enough to go work with Ken and Stu, but he also abandoned us, and he was on a gravy train for 6 months, and then he just abandoned us to our fate, which again, his testimony would have been significant. So so he didn't. Could have been better, could have been worse with Victor. So there's only a handful of us. And again, promotions, all this kind of, in fact, the prosecutor eventually promoted to be a judge. Everybody get their hands bloody. Everybody gets promoted. This is how the most corrupt county in the United States worked. And so early on, so Dennis, when he got arrested, Allison secured an attorney, a local attorney, who had this reputation for being this sort of maverick attorney and, taking on the system. Well, he really didn't. But that was his reputation. And so anyway, early on, so soon after the earliest hearing, the bail hearing, etc., Dennis's attorney approached Mr. Prosecutor, which is, again, a normal situation. And he basically approached her and said, can we work something out? like a plea bargain or something. And this prosecutor made her memorable reply. She said, if Dennis pleads guilty to all charges, I'll see to it that he doesn't get the death penalty. Yeah. Yeah. That was her. She was really full of herself that day. And again, she was a rube. And this, I'll get into this later, but yeah, the level of professionalism there in Ventura County was almost non-existent. Yeah, this is backwoods. So this was really, these were hicks. And so, yeah, that kind of statement, that kind of summed up her. In fact, I heard plenty of other unprofessional comments from her, and lies. Again, first time I saw her, she lied, told 10 big lies in a minute or something. It was amazing. And Ken lied and threatened. So Allison was trying to raise the bail and trying to get people to put up the property, homes and stuff, so to make the bail bond. And Ken was all over it. So Ken somehow, he knew everything Allison was doing, and he sure he had Confederates on the inside, etc. And so he lied and threatened everybody who might have helped Dennis. So Jerry Hipple, that guy who the nearby ranch in Carpinteria, who eventually bought our heat pump, installed it with his son, and they were saving $5,000 a year. He was going to put up his ranch, $600,000 ranch as bail collateral. And then Ken got a hold of Jerry and lied to him, and he told him that if Dennis was convicted, Jerry would lose his ranch, which is a lie. I mean, bail bond is just to make sure Dennis appears for trial, which that wasn't a risk. And so it was a big lie, and it worked. And in fact, in Dennis's alternative, you can see the affidavit that Jerry wrote. In fact, Jerry eventually, I think at the misconduct hearing, probably, I don't know if it was at the preliminary misconduct, where Jerry testified. And he testified, and again, one of the good guys, he testified, and he testified that he was saving between $400 a month with his heat pump, which they didn't want. Again, we got some evidence on the record, which again, they were doing everything they could to make sure that nobody testified that the heat pump even worked, but Jerry did. And he wasn't the only one, but that was a big lie. So Ken told big lies. He lied, threatened, lied, threatened. And that was his MO. And Jerry then said, I can't afford to lose my ranch, so I'll pull it from consideration for bail collateral. It worked. Yeah, lies can work, particularly in these kind of situations. And so Mr. Deputy and Ken, just kind of like Betsy and Bill Delp there in Seattle, it was an inside-outside job. So Ken waited until Dennis was arrested to make his move to steal the company. Yeah, don't kick a man unless he's down. So this is normal. And again, Ken and Mr. Deputy, I believe, were working together. And they were both ultimately working with the same people. And I don't know, again, I don't know if they had a secret handshake or just kind of knew that each one was like, there's a fellow traveler, and we're going to bring that mammoth down together. So I don't know exactly what was going on between those two, but it was ugly. It was dirty, and it was an inside-outside job. Yeah. So again, I think Ken was working for the global elite when he did this. Again, as a contract agent, like Bill Delp was. And again, Ken eventually pulled off one scam too many and spent 15 years in prison later on, which I'll get to. But they were effective. Yeah. So, and again, Wayne was threatened with losing everything. And yeah, so threat, liar, threat. That's kind of how that works. And the bail bond company that Allison was working off, they were spooked by the obviously political nature of Dennis's incarceration. So they kept changing, they kept moving the goalposts on Allison. And it became evident that they were never going to issue a bail bond, no matter how much collateral Allison put up. And Miss Prosecutor, that sterling legal mind, she also filed a motion which was going to deny Dennis bail even if it was raised. And she cited a precedent from New Jersey where some drug dealer actually sold drugs to raise his bail. And so they equated our company and everybody associated with this to be some drug running enterprise. And basically it was like with the circular reasoning, everybody associated with Dennis would be a criminal. So with that, so none of Dennis's, no money, you couldn't pay enough money because she said it was all dirty because of association with Dennis. With that reasoning, Bill Gates couldn't have made bail. So this was the kind of activity that was going on. Yeah, just I never was in a Stalinist show trial, or the Nazi when the Nazis were running the show. But I imagine it looks similar in ways what was going on in Ventura County. So yeah, so there I was, driving to Los Angeles, working. I mean, going blind in the basement, microfiche, reconciling some garnishment account for Pinkerton, etc. Um, and I was looking for work though. And so, but then it became again soon thereafter. So September, October was just waiting for trial, me working, Allison and her children living with Wayne. And it was like the wait for trial. That's kind of what it was. And so, and Wayne's adopted daughter also lived with them for a while. And so, it was a pretty full house there. And Dennis, being Dennis. So Dennis, again, back to his back when I saw him in September, he said that when he was in the army, he was 85 pounds of rippling muscle. But when again he was paralyzed from the neck down, all these kinds of things. And then when he was arrested, he weighed probably close to 300 pounds, maybe 270, 280, somewhere up there like that. And in the jail were like cell blocks of like 35 inmates. That's kind of how it works. And the jail was new. So this jail was, again, it was built at the Ventura County Center, which my friend Gary Ween later discovered was a big defrauding of the public. So yeah, so if I don't know, $50 million was spent building it, probably $10 million went to lining corrupt pockets of judges and stuff. Then again, it's how it works there. And Dennis, there he was thrust into this jail with like 35 men. And these jails were places of fear. It was like, again, I've never been in jail, but I heard this was a very fearful place to be. And Allison, he said, Dennis grows where he is planted. And so when he was in the cell block of 35 men, when he got there, it was a place of fear. And Dennis, being Dennis, within like a week, he had transformed that transformed that cell block into a dorm atmosphere. Yeah. So the law of the jungle, there's no more law of the jungle. Dennis, he rallied with some of the other guys with him, and they said, there's no more law of the jungle here. And Dennis also, in fact, when I saw him in September, he talked about this, and I heard about this, he thought he was doing it secretly. So when a lot of people who get arrested there, they're drug addicts, heroin addicts. And so they are trying to kick heroin cold turkey. So Dennis would use his commissary Wayne was funding all this stuff. So Wayne would buy chocolate, Dennis would buy chocolate bars and put them under the pillows of the new inmates, who were trying to kick heroin, cold turkey on heroin and stuff. So he was doing that. And Dennis thought he was doing it secretly, but the other guys in the cell block realized what Dennis was doing. So Dennis was kind of like the Santa Claus figure. And anyway, there were events. I won't get into the details here, but it eventually became clear that Dennis, he was revered in the jail by the inmates as some kind of saint. And Dennis was. So anyway, but at the jail there, the inmates they starved the inmates. So it was like a minimum. I don't know, there's 1,200 calories there or something. It was a minimum amount. Everybody was hungry all the time. And so, I'm sure that with the corruption there, whoever ran the concession to feed those guys, whatever they didn't feed the men lined their own pockets. I'm pretty sure that was probably the case. And so these guys, so they starved him. Yeah, when Dennis eventually did prison time years later, it was nothing like that. So yeah, they actually starved the inmates. So Dennis, and again, Dennis being this Christian guy, etc., he was in the 40-day water fast, which I do juice fast. Water fast is too hard. My longest water fast was like 6 days. Huh, I could barely walk when that happened. I did juice fast, but Dennis would do water fast. And so as soon as he got there, so the first month in jail, Dennis fasted. And what he did was he went to meals. So he ended up getting meals, okay? And what he did was he got his meal and then he gave it to the biggest, meanest guy in his cell block. He made friends fast. And so I said within a week, Dennis had transformed the environment from a place of fear to a dorm atmosphere. And this was Dennis. And yeah, they were amazing. That's Dennis. But Mr. Deputy ran the jail. So Mr. Deputy was, again, he was King Rat, ran the jail to overlook Dennis's comfort. And after Dennis had been there a month, again, totally transformed his cell block into this peaceful atmosphere. Mr. Deputy had to move to a new cell block where he didn't know anybody. Well, Dennis then started over, and within a week, he had transformed into this dorm atmosphere again. But Mr. Deputy he didn't want Dennis getting too comfortable. And they were trying to break him for trial, as we will find later, with solitary confinement and stuff. They're doing everything they could to break Dennis for trial, trying to intimidate him, break his spirit. They tried it on the wrong guy. Like trying to intimidate me. It's like they tried it on the wrong guy, as we will see later. Yeah, in fact, moving him like that was probably illegal, but in Ventura County, they just make it up as they go. Yeah, he was King Rat. In fact, it was interesting because he was put in charge of the jail, but he really didn't run the jail. It was a figurehead. It was just a figurehead position, a plum he was given for his dirty work. And so the sergeant who really ran the jail, he kept running the jail. So yeah, Mr. Deputy he wasn't there very often. And they were barbaric. And I get to later on, but the deputies there would throw people down stairwells and stuff. Yeah, these are brutal barbarian gangster types. Yeah, in fact, they probably murdered people in the jail. Probably did. Yeah, there were a number of suicides in the jail, like the year before Dennis was arrested and stuff. So yeah, I think they murdered people. Yeah, this is how they play ball. Dennis, so Wayne, so again, Wayne took in Allison and her daughters. And when Dennis did get out of jail, he lived with them again for about a year. Dennis lived. So that was Wayne's phone number was the only phone number for Dennis for years. And Wayne told me that, again, after Dennis left, so I think by probably the end of 1990, Dennis had left Ventura County. And for years, Wayne would get phone calls from Dennis's former cellmates. And the former cellmates wanted to call to let Dennis know that they were still on the straight and narrow. Yeah, so they were calling to thank the man who changed their life. I mean, this is like out of the movies. So yeah, this is Dennis. This is Dennis. So he changed lives in jail, turned their lives around. Yeah. So and then all the evil tricks that Mr. Deputy and friends were playing. Yeah, Dennis is by far the greatest human I've ever known. So for me, again, I left California twice ago. I've never come back, and then I was driving to Los Angeles. Yeah, the irony was not again. When I pass over, I'll be letting on the joke of all that. So yeah, it's so much that was unbelievable to me. It's like, why the hell am I here? Why is this happening? I still don't know, but I think I'm on special assignment. Like if you like me, this is part of what it's like being on special assignment. Not fun. There is compensation periodically, but yeah, it's not an easy road. So the preliminary hearing was going to be held in November 1988. And that month would be the most pivotal month of my life. And that comes next. So that's all I have for now. Bye for now.